Germany has triggered a row among eurozone members after it decided to act alone in addressing the worsening sovereign debt crisis in Europe. A desperate move? What are the implications, and can the single currency be saved? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hazem Seeker. Desperate times call for desperate measures, or so it seems, as Germany unilaterally bans naked short selling and credit default swaps. Now let's start by breaking down some of that jargon for you. Short sellers usually borrow shares that they think will fall in price in the near future. They sell them right away. If and when the stock falls, they buy them back and return them to the lender, keeping the difference in price. Naked short selling occurs when a trader sells stocks or bonds or currency without borrowing them, and naked credit default swaps are used to insure against losses. Germany's announcement was meant to crack down on speculators and shore up the euro. Instead, markets took the move as a sign of political panic, sending the euro to a 4-year low. But German Chancellor Angela Merkel is convinced stricter regulations across Europe is the key to rescuing the embattled currency.
This is a challenge to our very existence, and I must add, we have to prevail. If the euro fails, Europe fails. But if we avert this danger, the euro and Europe will come out stronger than before.
Well, France, on the other side, strongly reacted to the German decision and said it did not share its view on the euro. French Finance Minister said this: "I absolutely do not think that the euro is in danger. The euro is a solid and credible currency." Well, let's hear some reactions by European officials on Germany's unilateral move to ban short selling.
Close coordination within the European Union on all issues which have a strong market impact is very important and needs to be strengthened.
We fully understand why the Germans have made their decision. The German authorities are in the best position to make those decisions on the basis of the facts that they have. You ask about speculative attacks. I think we all understand, and the Commission understands, why in certain cases, when there is downward spiral, it can make sense indeed to temporarily suspend naked short selling. It has been done in the past. A number of member states have done it. So as I say, we do understand the reasons behind the German decision.
Well, Germany's plans to avert future crisis comes after months of uncertainty in the region. Going back just 6 months ago, in November, the Greek government acknowledged a massive budget deficit and a record high national debt. Since then, several tough austerity measures have been imposed, leading to a series of street protests. In December, Ireland unveiled its budget for 2010. It announced pay cuts for the public sector as part of efforts to save nearly $6 billion. The following month, Spain announced similar plans aimed at saving $70 billion by 2013. Then in April, eurozone ministers approved $40 billion in aid to bail out Greece. Earlier this month, the EU and the IMF approved an emergency safety net for the euro worth $1 trillion, with Germany providing the bulk with almost $160 billion. Also this month, the Portuguese government announced plans to slash its deficit. Well, joining our discussion today are our guests. In Berlin, Herbert Dieter, co-director of the Warwick Commission on International Financial Reform. In London, Jacques Rallon, head of European research at the Global Policy Institute. And in Washington, D.C., Tony Avirgan of the Global Policy Network. Now, Herbert Dieter, if I could start with you. We touched on this a little bit at the top of the program, but just for the uninitiated among us, those of us who are not traders and economists, how does this type of trading work in the market, and why has the German government chosen to go after this particular type of trading?
Well, there has been a lot of speculation in markets over the recent weeks. There has been speculation against sovereign debt of Spain, of Portugal, and I presume that the German authorities thought it was about time to send some signals to the markets that not all activities, not all speculative activity will be tolerated in German financial markets. I'm not sure whether it was a good decision to go ahead with those measures unilaterally, but it is also a sign of the political mood in Germany. Germans are getting increasingly impatient with ever-increasing bailout measures, and I presume that the German government thought it had to do something in order to calm tempers in Germany.
Jacques Roland, there's a lot of angry German voters out there. Was this simply a crude attempt by Chancellor Merkel to appease them?
Yeah, you could say that. I mean, many people have argued that it was in order to pacify a domestic opinion, because now today they have to. I think it's today or tomorrow. The German Parliament will have to agree the package to provide guarantees for other states in the European Union. But I think at the same time, it really mirrors a mood which is shared by other countries as well as Germany, because there is the feeling, which has been growing for quite a while, that now the markets are attacking the states and thinking that it is all the more kind of immoral, because the states kind of rescued the banks when they were nearly on the point of crashing, and that's what loaded the sovereign debt of most of the countries, and therefore it's a question of they seem to be biting the hands that helped them to survive, that came to their rescue. So there is something profoundly shocking for public opinions to see that now banks are and markets and hedge funds are now gambling on the sovereign debt. It's well known that each time there is a financial crisis, it leads later on to a sovereign debt crisis, and this sovereign debt crisis tends to affect the weak link of the world economy. In the 1980s, it was Latin America. Today, it's the eurozone. At the same time, there is an element of we are shooting the messenger, while this crisis shows that there is something very profoundly wrong with the European Union, which I think the German announcement yesterday, unilateral announcement, kind of highlighted. It's the lack of coordination, the lack of consultation within the Eurozone. There's a feeling that there's no pilot in the plane, and therefore that it is an issue that must be addressed. It's a fundamental issue about the euro, which has been highlighted by the markets.
All right, Tony Erdogan, does this? What's your take on this? Does this reflect a sense of desperation among the Eurozone?
Well, I think it reflects a sentiment that exists in many countries, including here in the United States. It's a feeling, as has just been said, that when there is a financial trouble in any area, speculators move in and make the situation much worse. And I think Angela Merkel is proposing something just trying to bring this under control and stabilize this kind of activity. There's been talk about this from members of the Obama administration here in the United States as well, and hopefully I agree that it doesn't do much if Germany takes unilateral action, but hopefully this will inspire other countries to take action like this Euro-wide and also here in the United States.
Herbert Dieter, there is a real sense that Germany has sort of gone about this like a sledgehammer, no coordination, just going it alone. That's hardly going to bring confidence and stability back to the markets, is it?
No, it's not going to bring confidence back to the markets, but there is a certain tradition here in Germany, a rather unfortunate tradition, I must say, to unilaterally announce measures in difficult times. We had the unilateral guarantee for savings announced by Chancellor Merkel on the 5th of October 2008, which was subsequently followed by others. We shouldn't go down that road much further, but at the same time, there is Angela Merkel is under a lot of pressure, and I have certain sympathy for her activity and for the actions she has taken, because, as said earlier, the German public is getting increasingly frustrated with the lack of reform, and we see similar movements in the United States. The United States is moving ahead. The United States are moving ahead with the reform of the financial sector, and you could, of course, expect that the United States is coordinating its reform with the rest of the G20, the Group of 20. But the US is going ahead unilaterally, and of course that is no justification for Germany to copy that style, but it is something we see not only in Germany, we see it elsewhere. Of course, Germany is part of the European Union and is interested in increasing the stability of the European Union, so measures that have been taken this week should be the exception and cannot be the norm.
Jacques Roland, the traders and the speculators on the market are a very easy target. They're sitting there in front of their computer screens making money, whether the market falls or rises. But isn't that a convenient distraction for politicians? That the real reason behind this crisis is the failure of European governments to properly police themselves?
Yes, there is that element, but actually, if the euro is attacked, because we recognize, everyone recognizes today, there's a basic fault line in the design of the euro, that we have tried for the first time to create a monetary union. We have a currency without a political government at its head, and that is the big issue at the heart of the euro problem. So, in a way, maybe the speculators are doing us a favor by obliging us to focus onto the architecture of the euro and try to improve it. And in my mind, it's impossible to have a common currency if at the same time you haven't got a certain form of political and fiscal cooperation. And this fiscal cooperation up to now has just been in a very negative way. It was done by the Stability Pact, try not to get too much into deficit. But I think it should be a much more proactive form of fiscal coordination. And it should look at issues of, in my mind, fiscal harmonization to a certain degree and greater fiscal solidarity for the members of that currency union.
Tony Arvigan, I saw you nodding in agreement to some of that. Can you have an effective economic union without an effective political union?
I think not. I agree that the lesson from all of this is that there needs to be a much greater degree of cooperation, not move for separation and each country going its own way, but within Europe, there needs to be a coordination of all financial systems. I mean, Greece, of course, has an absolutely horrible tax collection system, and that was just let to exist for a long time, and actually has a big part in leading to this crisis in Greece. But that kind of thing should not be tolerated within Europe. There needs to be more coordination, more Euro-wide oversight, and the strengthening of the euro and the political and economic cooperation throughout the region.
Herbert Dieter, what implications does all of this have for the long term? Are we looking at the beginning of the end of the single European currency?
Well, I don't think that, but let me just comment on what my two colleagues have just said. I beg to differ here a little. I think the old model was better than some observers are willing to concede. The old model was there's fiscal independence and there's fiscal responsibility by each and every member country of the eurozone, and that is a sound model, provided you permit bankruptcy of countries that don't observe these rules and that are continuing a fiscal policy that is not sustainable. The new model means we have to have some sort of super authority that looks into the fiscal policies of each and every member country, and that may create resentment and resistance in those countries quicker than we think. We already see that in Athens flags are burning, and that we already see a lot of anger in the streets of Athens about the tough policies that the International Monetary Fund and the European Union has prescribed for Greece. That Greece is responsible for the situation is easily forgotten. So that new model is a problem, and I do not see that it is a sustainable model for the coming years. And if the difficulties will continue,
But Herbert, just to go back to my
this model.
Sorry. I just want to go back. I just want to ask. Sorry, just 1 second. I just want to ask Herbert to go back to my earlier question. You don't feel that this is bad news for the euro long term? That this could be the beginning of the end of a great European experiment, as some have said?
Well, it is riskier than we have thought. A while ago, nobody would have questioned the future and the sustainability of the euro. Now we see that it is probably not as sustainable as we had hoped it to be. And there is a lack of, there's a limited willingness in Germany and other northern European countries, I would like to suggest, to go on that trajectory and to take responsibility for other people's mistakes. So that is a risk. And if we don't find ways to correct those mistakes, the euro will not have a very long and very bright future.
Jacques Roland, your response?
Yeah, what I wanted to say is that this model that we had was fine when the conditions were fairly normal. It was really good. The Stability Pact was a fair weather way of coordinating the fiscal policies of different governments. But when we have a shock like we've had in the last couple of years, it doesn't apply. At the same time, there was another shortcoming in the Stability Pact, is that it only looked at public debts. And you had countries such as Spain, which were considered to be doing fantastically, but never looked at the issue of private debt at the same time. When you realize that Spain has now the private debt of about 300% of the GDP, even though its public debt was 40%, Spain was heralded as a model. And as soon as we have a shock, a financial shock like we've had, the Spanish economy is suddenly in big disarray, while before it was seen as absolutely sound. So there is a need to change the Stability Pact and to make it to have a certain system of surveillance which doesn't just look at public finances, but look also at the state of the private economy and their macroeconomic policy. So it means that we need a much stronger level, a much deeper level of coordination, which must go beyond purely the state of public debt, and which should involve the type of policy, the type of economic policies that countries put into practice. And that's why I think it should lead to a much bigger role, a much more proactive role for the Eurogroup.
All right, let's take a quick pause from the discussion and look at what this ongoing debt crisis in Europe means for the United States. Former Federal Reserve Chairman and Special Advisor to President Obama, Paul Volcker, has warned if we need further illustration of the potential threats to our economy from uncontrolled borrowing, we have only to look at the struggle to maintain the common European currency, to rebalance the European economy, and to sustain the political cohesion of Europe. So let me start with you, Mr. Avigan. What lessons can the United States learn from this?
Well, I think this just strengthens people in the United States who are calling for financial reform, for more controls on the financial system, more controls on banks, and especially more controls on speculation of all types. And Paul Volcker is one of those people who is heading a commission that's looking into this, and but it's a very widespread feeling in the United States, and I think also a popular sentiment with the public in the United States. So the problems that are existing in Europe are just strengthening those in this country who are calling for tighter restrictions and financial reform.
So, Jacques Roland, as we widen this out a little bit, what kind of implications is this going to have globally? I mean, we know how interconnected our world is now. We got a sober reminder of that back in late 2008 with the financial crisis, which started in the United States. Are we in danger of heading towards something like that again if it isn't contained?
No, I hope not. And I think actually this crisis, what's happening in Europe, has led to an international awareness that there is a big problem with this deregulated finance. We've seen that, for example, Angela Merkel accepted the deal, the $1 trillion deal to guarantee sovereign debt in the EU after a call for Obama. So the Americans also are aware that this problem is not just focused, at the moment, the focus in the eurozone, but it's getting out of hand. International finance is a kind of, we've put a genie out of the bottle, and we don't know how to control it, how to put it back now. And it is, and before, I used to think, for example, that the Chinese were quite pleased with that state of affairs, and I've read reports saying that the Chinese themselves, who were thinking of relaxing rules on their banking system in order to be able to rebalance the economy, to fuel consumption, because they know that exports are going to dwindle because of the situation in their main markets, such as the EU and in America, are now have cold feet about deregulating their bank, or certain deregulation of their banking system, because they fear it. So it leads me, I'm fairly optimistic that this global awareness means that maybe some proper solutions to control the financial system will be adopted at the G20 meeting, because I think it's in the interest of the whole world. We are now in, as I repeat, there is, we are going to a war between markets and states, and political forces have to regain the upper hand, which will be very difficult, but at least now they're aware that it is a big challenge.
All right, so if a more centralized approach in European government is the way forward here to stop further crises like this, I mean, that might make sense economically, Herbert Dieter, but politically, that's not going to go down well in many European capitals, is it?
Well, we have to consider that one day Brussels will tell Berlin what to spend and what not to spend. This is the consequence of greater fiscal or greater authority for fiscal policy in Brussels, and that is not going down well in all member countries of the European Union. I would like to agree with what has been said by Jacques Roland. I would like to suggest that fiscal policy worldwide is much more closely observed these days. I've just read that the new Japanese government is looking at its fiscal policy, which is of course disastrous in many respects, in order to reform it and in order to avoid difficulties European style. So it is a necessary wake-up call, and I do think that chances for the re-regulation of financial markets and for more prudent and more sustainable fiscal policy have grown after this current shock.
All right, just briefly in the minute or so that we have Tony Avignon in Washington, there are lessons to be taught here and lessons to be learned as well. Can the United States teach Europe a lot about a unified fiscal policy?
Well, I think the United States is not really in a position to teach people anything. I mean, there is this American exceptionalism where many politicians in this country think they have nothing to learn from the rest of the world. But the fact is, there are lessons to be learned from what's happening in Europe, and I hope this will reshape U.S. fiscal policy and financial controls. And we have to remember that, at least we believe, that this whole idea of financial deregulation started with this cowboy approach that Ronald Reagan had here in the United States, and carried on from there, that all kinds of regulation was bad economics. And I think that now that idea has been shown to be disastrous. And there are things to be learned from other countries, like, well, especially to observe what's happening in Europe. But countries like Brazil, for instance, never gave up, never deregulated their financial system. They never gave up controls on banks and did quite well.
All right. All right, that is going to have to be the last word, but I want to thank all our guests for taking part in the discussion. Herbert Dieter, co-director of the Warwick Commission on International Financial Reform in Berlin. Jacques Roland, head of European research at the Global Policy Institute in London. And Tony Avignon of Global Policy Network in Washington. Gentlemen, many thanks for your time. Now, just before we go, we've had some interesting comments on previous episodes on Inside Story on Iran's nuclear deal brokered by Brazil and Turkey. Dave Kimball from Australia says, why, after 2 years of Iranian suspension on enrichment in 2003, was there no progress on the nuclear talks? It is the US that has no credibility in this affair. The US wants to continue to have an excuse to continue sanctions on Iran and to keep its threat of nuclear attack against Iran in the hope that the Iranian regime will fall and the US can get back in charge of Iran's oil. It's all about oil. On the same issue, Hassan Karofi from Nigeria says, it baffles me how myopic and narrow-minded the West is if it comes to pressurizing third world countries on any matter, except, of course, if it is Israel. How many Security Council resolutions has the West kicked and disregarded, and how many has Israel? Thanks so much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. As always, we welcome your comments and suggestions, so please email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Goodbye for now.